Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored today to introduce you this special session on the energy and the city of the future, which will be a brainstorming of idea about this symposium for the session of 2020. The energy and the city or wheel of the future is a series of international events dealing with the city and the science. The city is a laboratory of meeting between dreams and realities. At a different scale, citizens have to manage daily and to make a better tomorrow. The history of the International Conference on the Energy and the City of the Future started in a simple coffee break in Sergi Pontoise, close to Paris, between Professor Mohamed Dar Sharif from PMI, Professor Nancy from Queen's University in Canada, Professor Ben Nasser from Ines Kashan, and myself, Professor El Ganawi from University of Lorraine. This simple discussion was so rich that we decided quickly about three institutions immediately to create a series of events with a specific spirit to couple under common exchange to mix together scientists, visionists of tomorrow, industrial, and policies of the city. Professor Ben Nasser and Jean-Michel Bricaire helped us continuously and joined the adventure in official sense about the email association in this session of 2020. Thank you for them. Then the symposium became the place to be for dreaming about 2050 city, then starting in Sergi, followed by Queens, followed by north of Morocco in Martil, the scientific basement of the conference being built in French language. Without imagination, future can't find any support to materialize human progress. As sketched on the slide that you see, the city of Longwy, which is a very small city in the north of France, in frontier between Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, there is an imagination of 2050 and worked 2 days of the EVF symposium on 2017. Without a memory, future doesn't make any sense. This is a picture of our EVF in Fez in Morocco, a city old of 1,200 years. The conference served here as a bridge to connect past and future, history and future. Then we go to the city of Pune in India, close to Mumbai. This city with more than 3.5 million inhabitants become a city who gives some maturity to our event because the event traveled from the Francophone area to Anglophone area to a big country with a huge question on energy, materials, and cities. Here the edition reached the international dimension with full English presentation and paper published in E3Z proceedings. The next edition was supposed to held in Paris, but as you know, because of the health crisis, our session of today is supposed to make a brainstorming, serving potentially to alimentate the topics for coming events. All editions needed a huge organization. Warm thanks to Professor Desano for dressing the summary of Longwy edition, Professor Zorkani for Faz edition, and special warm to Professor Sridharshan for dressing the summary of Pune edition and for his group for such a huge work for organization, the Symposium of Pune. Our edition conclude with a signed document from scientists, citizens, political leaders on a strong intention on working on a common future of a better city, sustainable, making science and progress in the service of a better life of each and of all. This format making possible the session starting from in Canada at 8 a.m. and ending in India 10 and a half hours later. That allow us a panoramic vision on EVF history and progress for a city taking advantage on renewable resources for housing and mobility, energy, etc., taking to women in the center of the scientific and the technical progress. Many thanks for Queen University and University Mohammed VI in Morocco for hosting the online edition. Warm thanks to our speaker from Canada, Cameroon, France, India, Russia, and we wish you a big success and a long life to this event serving Homen and the city. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to meet all of you guys that I know for a long time. As Jean-Michel said, today I'm going to talk about urban climate change adaptation and mainly resilience. This is part of my research, but also I have physics research. I work on active fluids and bacterial physics, in fact, with the intention of using transforming solar energy to biofuels directly through the microbes and bacteria and so on. But here today, I'm going to concentrate on the global aspect of the climate change. Okay, how does it go? Good, good. Yeah. Well, Professor Deglise set the stage for the climate change. He told us the problems, and I'm just going very quickly on it. He also mentioned that November 2020 was the warmest in the recent history. And so I don't need to introduce the climate change to you. All of you, you know it very well. By the way, I forgot to tell you that my talk, I apologize, my talk would be very, very kind of a series of snapshots. Each of the transparencies can be subject of one seminar, but because the time is short and I want to cover as much as I can the whole subject, so I'm going to go very fast, and I would apologize a priori if I'm not very clear. I would be more than happy to answer the questions if there is any. Okay, so the climate change is in front of us. We are feeling it, and we know that we had the warmest temperature. The climate change does not hit the whole area in the same way. As you can see in this map over here for the United States, the climate change hits some places with warming, other places with drought. Different colors show the different effects of the climate change in a country, and we have to be ready to, in fact, to combat it. Temperature is increasing. This is that the summer temperature increased between 1970 to 2018, and you see that it has risen 2 degrees in the United States, and you can get these kind of statistics almost everywhere. Okay, so for combating this climate change, we have 2 or 3 ways to do it. Just go very fast and schematically. One way is to do nothing. Okay, we just don't talk about it. The other way is to do mitigation. By mitigation, we mean strategies which are focused on eliminating the causes and reducing the effects of the climate change. It is mainly long-term. But because the climate change is right behind us and we are confronting it every day, adaptation strategies have been chosen by many countries in parallel with mitigation. And by adaptation strategy, we mean reducing negative consequences and how to adapt and be resilient to adverse impacts of the climate change. So in fact, we are not, in fact, healing the problem at the origin, but we are trying to protect ourselves from its negative effects. And I'm going to focus mainly on the second one. This triangle can show you the three choices that I said. One country or one society can decide to do nothing, or the other one can put all its efforts on adaptation or all of its efforts on mitigation. And in each case, there's a price that you pay. If you don't do anything, in fact, you are going to pay for the impacts. But if you do something, then you have to invest on it. And then, depending on modelings and all of the strategic analysis, one country or one city can decide to put itself somewhere inside of the triangle. But today, I'm going to talk about adaptation, in fact. And the reason is that even if the greenhouse gas emissions could be stabilized relatively soon, climate change will continue for many decades and even centuries, regardless of the success of global mitigations that we saw called initiatives to reduce the greenhouse gases. So in response to this actual now and expected climate change, including its frequency and severity of weather-related disasters, building the ability and learning how to live with climate change is now more than ever important for humanity. And that is what we call it urban resilience. And I'm going to concentrate on this one. And then the climate change is everywhere, cities, rural areas, desert, and so on. We're going to concentrate in cities. And the reason is that cities are the places that more than 50% of the humanity lives now, and more than this, about 30%, 70% of the humanity will live in cities by 2050. So in that case, cities are places where we have a big concentration, and if they are hit by the climate change, they will, in fact, suffer very much. At the same time, cities are complex, adaptive, emerging systems that are comprised of a lot of components, at least divided in 4 categories or subsystems. To go very fast and very schematically, a city has subsystem, which is called governance networks, another subsystem, which is network materials and energy flows. I'm going to show it in the next slide. Urban infrastructure, and 4, and socio-economic dynamics. These are the components that constitute a city. Let's see if I can move it. And here I show it. I show it in a kind of simplified conceptual model. The governance network by itself has a big network. It has states like all of the decision makers, the city hall, the governance, and so on. We have laborers, industry, NGOs, consumers, all of these things kind of regulate the governance of the network. The city has also the network of materials and energy flows. In the city, we produce food, we import food, we export water, consumer goods, materials, energy, and we produce waste that either we just destroy it or do whatever we want to do it, or we export it. So there are things that come in and going out. And in this sense, a city is a kind of an open system. And at the same time, these 2 layers communicate with each other. So you can imagine all of these networks. The material part of the city, which is the infrastructure form, is constituted of buildings, utilities, transportation, and ecological systems like greenhouse, forest, green spaces, forests, parks, and so on, waterways. And again, these 3 layers interact with each other, and eventually socioeconomic dynamic of the system of the city, which is in fact the soul of the city, capitals, banking, commerce, mobility, equity and justice, police, demographics, public health, education, all of these are parts of this fourth layer. And all of them get together, constitute a very, I would say, intense, complex, coupled, dynamical system, because the effect of each of them will have implementation on the others. Okay, so faced to those effects of the climate change on the one hand, and having this complex system, a city should be resilient. And to be resilient means that, I'm going to get it later too, means that it can satisfy the needs of the citizens in the face of unpredicted impacts of the climate change. And that's why I want to elaborate a little bit on the notion of resilience, the theory of resilience, and then get back to the city. The word resilio means bouncing back. When you throw a tennis ball to the ball, when it comes back to you, it is resilient. So you are recovering your ball. And in recent years, the popularity of resilience has exploded in both academic and policy discourses for many, many reasons. But as you are going to see later, that the resilience has changed, the meaning and the notion has changed very much compared to this very old meaning of resilience. So, resilience exists everywhere, in politics, in engineering, in psychology, and so on. And it's very old, in fact. The word existed many years ago. But the new concept of resilience has started with the works of Holing, who was a biologist and who used resilience to describe the ability of an ecological system, because he was just interested with ecological systems, to continue functioning or to persist when changed, but not necessarily to remain the same. So the ecological systems are always threatened by the effect of different antagonistic effects. And then we should ask this very legitimate question that, are they going to continue to exist or not? Are we going to have the trees that Dr. Neglis talked about so much, because we have some other ways that the trees are destroyed? And should the trees exist exactly the same way that they existed before or not? So this new concept of resilience of the ecological system is based on the acceptance of changes rather than the persistence. That means that the system, we allow that the system changes because of the external factors, not be the same as it was before. As long as it satisfies the needs of its users, we say that it is resilient. And this is theoretically a very important difference. By recognizing ecosystems as dynamic with multiple stable states, Holing's work was a marked departure from the traditional stability paradigm of ecology, which is often associated with the American scientist, Professor Clement, who considered always resilience, a system is resilient if it stays as it is, faced to all of the unwanted, I would say, threats. Okay. To work further, Holing tried to put some mathematical modeling on the resilience theory. He himself was not. He was a biologist. And so he tried to borrow ideas from dynamical systems, because that was the mathematical approach that was most fitted, most tailored to the project. So it started with a very, very simple system, a system in which there are 2 degrees of freedom, as if you are just closing the whole world, and in this world there are 2 things that they are in competition with each other. For instance, you have, I would say, rabbits, a population of rabbits, and you have a population of grass. The rabbits eat grass. And when there are a lot of rabbits, there would be less grass. And then the rabbits who don't have enough grass, they die. And the population counts. And that allows the grass to grow up. And when there is more grass, the rabbits reproduce more, and we have more rabbits and eat it more, and again and again. So these are two, I would say, conflicting populations, and he wanted to see the evolution because time is going by there, and wanted to know at the end of the day or the time here, is it going to exist rabbits and grasses in the world or not? The resilience is that. So he borrowed the idea of phase portrait, and he just, as you do it in the mathematical system, in the theory of differential equations. And so the state of the coupled system over here, each state is represented just only with one point. So it is the population of grass among grass, the population of the rabbits, and here is where these two populations are. And the time flows in this direction. And then we see that while time is passing, then the system state is going towards a point like over here. And this point at the end is where the system will stay. If this point is stable, then the system is resilient. And in that case, it continues to exist. And if it is not, the system is going to be disappear. Okay, it is a very simple world in which there is only rabbits and only grass. But if we add some other degrees of freedom parameters to the system in order to get closer to reality, we see that the system becomes more complicated. Well, imagine that there is a world in which there are only three things. There's grass, there is rabbits who eat the grass, and there are foxes who eat the rabbits. And when they interact with each other, so the system would be very dynamically coupled. And in that case, the system becomes a system with 3 degrees of freedom. Well, Holding thought that all of the things that we know about two-dimensional dynamical systems, like all of these phase portraits, would be applicable at infinity to the ecology. But at the same time, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, Holding was in Canada. In fact, he was in Vancouver, I think, in British Columbia, and then he moved to the United States. On this side, around Paris, there is an institute of mathematics in Gilles-sur-Yvette, in which the mathematicians were thinking about the dynamical systems, and they're asking the question that after how many or beyond how many degrees of freedom a dynamical system can become unpredictable. And then at that time, in 1973, almost at the same time that Holding was working and publishing, two scientists, David Rouelle, a French, and Florence Tekens, an American, were working on the appearance of turbulence and started with a system, a low-dimensional dynamical system with 3 degrees of freedom. And they found that even with 3 degrees of freedom, the system can become, for some parts or some values of the control parameters, can become unpredictable, or in other words, chaotic or turbulent, or whatever you want. And they could kind of theorize the what they call it, the Lorentz attraction, and they show that this dynamical system, it is going to shrink to a very small space inside of the 3 degrees of freedom, 3-dimensional system. And this shrink space, which is called a strange attractor, would be the resilient state in which the 3-dynamical system, the 3 degrees of freedom, will going to on, and the system will be shrink on this one. It is kind of easy to understand it if you look at this video that I borrowed from YouTube, And it talks about the Lorentz dynamical system, which has 3 degrees of freedom. In fact, Lorentz dynamical system is nothing more than the simplified form of Navier-Stokes equations, equation of continuity and diffusion, convection equation. And when you reduce it, it becomes a dynamical system that you can manage it easily. Let's look at this very quickly.
Il y a un problème de son, je crois. Hassan, on t'entend pas?
No, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. The simulation is running.
I'm sorry, Mohammed, you were saying something? Hello?
No, it's okay. Please pursue, please pursue.
Yeah, okay. So I continue. So as you can see, these 3 time series are rabbits, grass, and foxes. And then if you can have in the nature these 3 time series, you can build up your resilient, I would say, structure from them. He's saying that. Okay, I stopped here. It's longer than this. So as you saw, the dynamical system can represent, in fact, the urban systems, but it is a very difficult modeling in a way that you have to have the laws of variation of each of the components and then put them together, and you are going to have a dynamical system of very high degrees of freedom. Okay, so putting this aside, which opens up a good subject for those who are interested in mathematics, let's go back to the traditional but global theory of resilience. In the theory of resilience, as I said before, we are asking if the resilience is a single state equilibrium, is a multi-state equilibrium, or is a dynamic non-equilibrium system. Single state is very simple. That means that your bridge should be a single state in a way that after a thunderstorm, it comes back to itself. But it can be also multiple state equilibrium in a way that faced to some climate change attacks, the system can vary and transform to another system, which is still acceptable to the citizens, but it is not the previous system, or it can continuously vary and has never an equilibrium system. For instance, the second one, you can, for those who are doing the instability theory in Taylor-Quet, when you are increasing the Rayleigh number, you see that the system varies from non-vortex to vortex, and then if you keep the control value constant, then this vortex system is completely in equilibrium and is valid. It can be until eternity. But if you increase the dangers from outside, which is the Reynolds, Taylor number, then it goes to another state, which is the wavy vortex. But if you keep it at that level, still it remains until increasing. So these notions of equilibrium is very important when we talk about the resilience in the city. Also, the pathways or the mechanisms to the resilient state are very important. Is this persistence, transition, and transformation? By persistence, we mean that the system, which reflects the engineering principle that the system should resist disturbances. Building should be robust to storm impacts and try to maintain the status quo. You don't like a building that after a storm impact, it becomes tilted to left to right. But also, while functioning of a city is important, just retaining function is also an important component of most of the definitions in the resilience. So many definitions also refer to the ability to incrementally adapt or even more radically transform. And still the city is considered a resilient city. And in reality, resilience is a spectrum from avoidance, which is the resistance of breakdown, to a state where transformational changes is possible, which is transform. And transition remains in between. So these are the concepts that when you, as the resilience engineer, that we have more and more in the cities, big cities like Toronto, New York, or others have, so you have to think about it in order to build the resilience of the city faced to the climate change. So when eventually we have to find a definition for urban resilience. I found up to 26 definitions, and many of them are in opposition. One of them that is kind of acceptable for us is the following. Urban resilience refers to the ability of an urban system to maintain or rapidly return to desired functions, and that's important, in the face of a disturbance, to adapt to change, and to quickly transform systems that limit current or future adaptive capacity of the system. If we stick to this definition and we design our resilience strategy around it, probably we will be safe. Okay, now after these generalities, let's go to some realities. We know that the climate change has compound impact. In fact, the climate change hits the urban system and hits also the people, and especially the vulnerable groups in a people, which is an important problem. And all of these things have impacts on each other. So in designing the urban resilience, we have to focus at least on these three components of the resiliency. We have to know in that case, and as you see, the climate change can have a direct effect on the city by itself, or can have a direct impact on the vulnerable people, the poor people who are not able to protect themselves. And also by attacking the city, the destruction in the city have some indirect effect on the vulnerable people. So one has to know how the city works, and what to know what are the direct and indirect impacts of the climate change on the city, and who is the least able to respond to shocks and stress. And in that case, the actions that we need are urban poverty reduction, urban climate change risks, and also disaster reduction action. So these are the main components of the resilience strategy. Then to build a resilience strategy, you have to build agent capacities. When you look at globally a city, you can say that city has its capacities, agents, human beings, and it has its architectural or natural characteristics. So which are the main, and we are trying to simplify as much as possible the problem because it's very big. And which are the elements on which we can act? On the city size, on the city characteristics, we have at least three components that we have to take care of and be aware. Flexibility and diversity of the components of the city. Redundancy and modularity of the city. A city should not have only a single hospital and a single bridge. It should have redundant structure and be modularable in a way that if some parts are hit by the climate change, you can separate that from the other parts and then remedy that. And what is more important, be safe failure. That means that if some of the parts of the system fail, this failure is safe. On the capacity of agents, learning is important. That's people, but also agents, all of the people who work and their stakeholders. They should be resourceful, be able to act in front against the climate change, and especially be responsive in a way that even if they are resourceful, but they are not responsive, they cannot act at the time that we need it. So that is one of the mappings of the city. The other thing is that for a city, we have to build what we call urban climate change resilience planning process. And that is a big strategy that each city should have. And this is what is over here. To build this one, first you bring the stakeholders of the city and try to make an engagement on them in order to work together. And stakeholders, you can enumerate about 20 or 30 at least in a city. Each stakeholder goes back to its own sector, and he tries to make assessment of the climate change impact on his sector. They come back together and they build up the city resilience strategy. This is kind of a Bible for the city that all of the stakeholders in the face of a disaster should act according to. Then when there is an action, they collaborate to each other. And then at the same time, they try to learn the lessons of the things that they know before, and then synthesize it, document it, and get back to the stakeholder. This process is a dynamical process in which the city should continuously renew it at least once a year. Then I go very fast. I mean, it's really snapshot. Then what are the climate critical urban climate change resilience action areas that the city should be aware of and be prepared? There are 10 of them. There are two big ones. That is, one of them is the climate sensitive land use and urban planning, that you understand it quite well. And the other one is this institutional coordination mechanism and capacity building and capacity support. In short, this is the city, the buildings and the material part of the city, and this is the governance and the people. And inside of this, there are 8 or 9 probably crucial domains on which you have to work, and you have a complete strategy and modeling. Emergency management and early warning system, responsive health system, resilient housing, transportation system, also utilities, electricity, and so on. Ecosystem service strengthening, and that's important. This is the natural part of the city, the parks, rivers, ponds, forests, and so on. Education and capacity building of citizens. Diversification and protection of climate-affected neighborhoods. Drainage, flood, solid waste, and management. And that's kind of funny. These 3 things, which are very, very, I would say, primitive, have been found that they are at the origin of many urban floodings in small and big cities. And eventually, there's another domain action, water demand and conservation system. These are the action domains that we have to model it and put it to the big model. And eventually, to finish, I'm sorry, I'm going too long. And then to finish is, how can we build up a simplified model, or what is a system approach to urban climate change? So we try to simplify as much as possible. Let's look at a city. Here is a city which is very simplified. A city or urban system has its ecosystems, which are the natural resources, which are all of the resources that they are available and could be put in the service of the citizens. And the output is the income to the system. And the outcome to the system is well-being of the citizens. By well-being, I in other courses, in other lectures, I elaborate on well-being, which is very important. But to go very short is that the people can be safe, can eat, can get health, education, and so on and so on. So all of the things that you as a citizen are asking from your city. And the function of a city, from the mathematical point of view, is to transform this ecosystem, these resources, to the benefits of the well-being. How do we do that? We have many, in fact, leverages, but if you want to simplify to extreme, there are three: knowledge, and these are the know-hows how to do all of these. And with this knowledge, you can put a lot of elements of a city, institutions that transform this knowledge to action, and infrastructure that there are routes and the veins and the ways that this knowledge has been transferred to benefit to the well-being of the citizen. It is very simple, but each of these parts, you can model it separately. These models are interconnected. Then there are interconnections between the components. And then you run your modeling to see if your city is resilient with respect to such and such disaster or not. Okay, I think I should conclude now. I cannot say conclude because I just throw you some ideas. It is not really conclusion. What we did, we just talked about the impacts of the climate change, that they are very immediate. We talked about mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is something that we are doing for years and years. Adaptation is newer, and we have to do both of them in connection. We talked about cities as complex dynamical systems. We gave you a very simple models to work with them. Then we talked about resilience theory, because this is the backbone of the adaptation. We tried to find a definition for urban resilience. This definition is important because your strategy would be built based on this definition. You can improve it as much as you can. And we get from theory to practice with some solid field action that I counted for you. And eventually, for acting, we just showed a very, very simplified block of a system, which is a system approach to urban climate change adaptation. In the literature, based on this last system, you can find many problems that have been solved. For India, the problem of flooding, which was for years and years going on, without adding very many new, I would say, components to the city, they could solve the problem. So resilience and urban resilience is a very new topic for all of the scientists and engineers. You can contribute to it. I'm a mechanical engineer and a physicist, so I learned all of these things. I work on it, and all of you will be able, and we can borrow a lot of ideas from hard sciences to this one. Thank you for your attention.